Hello everyone and welcome to Avantika Designeering series or ADS as we like to call it. Every week on Wednesday, we feature design and technology leaders who share their professional journey, their thoughts on their domain of work, and designeering where the world of design and engineering meet. Make sure you follow us on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And with that, let's continue with your show.
As design thinking evolves and moves across different spheres, while connecting the dots between technology and business, the importance of having a multidisciplinary, inclusive approach is becoming more apparent. In fact, with an inclusive skill set, designers can reach out to a large and diverse set of users and create effective, emotional designs that help them stand out from the crowd. But this can only be achieved with a deep understanding of the user and a customer focused mindset. So, how can designers create a better customer experience built on the foundation of empathy? To know more about this theme, in this episode, while we complete our first anniversary, we interact with Abhimanyu Kulkarni, studio director at Philips. With over 2 decades of professional experience in design leadership roles and working in the health and well being industry, he holds expertise in front end innovation, conceptualization, design management, concept development, design thinking, art direction, and the list goes on. And that's why, on our journey of discovering designeering, we talk to him about experience, unifying innovation, and you. Hi, Abhimanyu. It's a pleasure to host you on Avantika Designeering podcast series. It's an honor to host you on our show today, the day when we nearly complete 1 year of doing this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this day.
Thank you. Thanks, Rohit.
So, Abhimanyu, as an ice breaking question, nowadays design is much more focused on inclusive skill sets, and designers are progressively evolving into leaders. Shouldn't design curriculum change gears to accommodate a more multidisciplinary approach, according to you?
Yeah, absolutely, Rohit. I mean, that's a great question. And I think that really summarizes, if I can say, the paradigm shift that we have seen in design profession in last few years. Because I think design has really gone from focusing on, producing something, an output, to really facilitating the process of, making that output. And when you talk about facilitation, it necessitates that you bring in multiple points of view, multiple people around the table, and you facilitate that process. And I think design plays that unique role. So in that sense, you're absolutely right. More and more design is looked up to play that role. If I look at even my own experiences, and one almost every designer, I think, irrespective of the position that they are in, they have to play this kind of like a dual role almost. That on one hand they are, the designers who don't mind, rolling up their sleeves and getting into the trenches and design, because that's our passion. That's what we want to do. We want a meaningful change to happen in the world. But at the same time, we also recognize that that change can happen only if we work with other people, and those other people are our colleagues, our stakeholders, our customers, our users. And they are most critical in that process, because it's not about what I think is right, but it's all about what is relevant, what is meaningful for people, when we are designing. So I think in that sense, if you talk about whichever level you are in an organization, or whether you're in government or you're sitting at the boardroom, I think essentially your job as a designer is to bring that point of view, which is very creative, which is different than others, which is very user centric, which sometimes other people tend to miss out, in their own, kind of, I don't know, I don't want to call it agenda, but with their own backgrounds. But I think designers are it's our duty to actually always bring in the users, always bring in the people, and those softer aspects that perhaps other people are a bit shy of talking about, that designers are brave enough to raise those points, and then get everyone around the table to actually talk about it, and to reach a consensus in terms of how we want to address those.
Wow, that's well said, Abhimanyu, and I'm glad you were able to connect the dots in such a beautiful way. Moving from there to your personal journey,
Yeah.
you have over 2 decades of experience and a proven track record of serving in the health and wellness sector. Front end creativity, conceptualization, design management, concept development, design thinking, and art directions are some of your expertise areas. Can you take us through your professional journey? Was it all of this so well planned, or did it just happen by chance?
Um, well, I think, as nothing in life, I think, probably happens by plan. And actually, like, I think it was John Lennon who said, life is what happens when you have different plans. So, well, at least in the times that I grew up, design was actually unheard of as a career, and of course, I took up engineering because, well, not that I particularly liked it, but well, that seemed to be the only career path in the town that I was growing in. But at the same time, I think when I came close to my graduation, my father could see that actually that I had what kind of like this artistic tendencies, you can say. I used to draw cartoons, and I was interested in painting and things like that. So that's where the suggestion to check out the industrial design course in IDC came about. And I have to say that going there changed my life. And it's not just because of IDC and the campus of IIT, which were great and fantastic. I was privileged to study under great professors. But I think design, as it seemed like a new window opened for me. I entered a completely different portal where my ideas about the world were kind of like turned upside down, and like my eyes really opened wide open. Like, oh wow, this is a world, and this is a completely different way of looking at things. And that's what it really hit me very hard. That. And you can imagine, coming from a small town, someone who only grew up looking at very very conventional careers of like being a doctor or an engineer, and like doing a job for your lifetime, and you suddenly end up in this, of course, in the city of Mumbai, etc. Those were also the influences. But I think design made a big impact on me, and but at the same time, IDC's culture was such that they encouraged us to think independently and bit differently. So I took up, actually, my initial love was for advertising, because I don't know, for somehow I got very much fascinated with communication design, and I wanted to, despite being a product designer, I actually joined an advertising agency, and I was there for a while. And although I left it, and then I came back to sort of like the product design, my education, it kind of like stayed with me. And I think even those 6 months that I spent in an ad agency really changed my view about looking at people and looking at customers, because advertising really thrives on really understanding your target segments and things like that. But then, well, uh, I dabbled around with running my own consultancy for a while, etc. And then I joined Philips. It was all like in a very short period of time, and then I never left Philips, because to begin with, I was doing a lot of consumer electronics products. So I started doing like designing audio products, and then I went on to doing international assignments, which were also very interesting, because then I got to do different electronic products. Like I was doing televisions, and back then, we had these things called as VCRs, and I don't know how many of our listeners remember those things, but there was also a product which combined television and VCR, which was made in our Vienna factory. So I was there for a while, Um, and all these, we were making laptops at one point in time, and we were making mobile phones. And then I went to Hong Kong, where I really focused on home audio systems. Like the whole digital revolution was happening with MPEG, etc. And we were making these home audio systems where you could wirelessly beam songs all around the house, etc. And coming from there, I came back to India in 2007, and the whole game here was around healthcare, because by then Philips had also transitioned to healthcare space. And to me, again, it was a completely, going into a different world, because everything that I had learned about the world of consumer electronics, about working fast and making beautiful products, and standing out in the shelf, etc., etc., seem to completely get inversed when you talk about healthcare, because healthcare is, the one is that the products are very slow in development. Healthcare is all about its stakeholders, the patients and the doctors and the nurses, etc. It's not so much about how beautiful it looks, but how relevant it is, and is it ergonomic, and how much time it saves you if you're doing a surgery, etc. So it was a completely different consideration. But I loved that challenge, because in a sense, your fundamental design education actually helps you to address any problem. I mean, any problem is a design problem in the end. And so I'm in healthcare for last, you can say, 13 years. And of course, my role within that has changed quite a bit, because I was a designer earlier, then a design manager, and now I'm leading a studio of about 60 people. And of course, I don't get a lot of chance to work on things by myself, but I play a different role now. I facilitate design thinking sessions with our customers, with large hospitals, with our sales organizations. I try to take design into spaces where people haven't heard about design, or they haven't seen the power of design. So I'm trying to do those things to kind of like, in my own modest way, open new frontiers for ourselves. For design.
And while you mentioned about Philips, in fact, Abhimanyu is a global health technology organization dedicated to enhancing people's health and creating healthier results across the health spectrum, from safe living and prevention to
Yeah.
diagnosis, recovery, and home care. To deliver integrated technology by using sophisticated technologies and broad clinical and customer insights. The question that I have for you, Abhimanyu, is could you please tell us about the company's design culture?
Sure. I have to, and I mean, when I speak about Philips, of course, there are other companies that are also been around for a long time. But Philips is a company that has a very long history. You can say about close to 100 years of history of design. So you can imagine. So if I go back to where design began in Philips in Eindhoven, where and there is an interesting story of the person who actually founded Philips Design. He was an architect called Louis Kaff, and he wrote a letter to back then the CEO of Philips, who was actually the original Philips family. And back then they were making, they had just begun to make bulbs and the radios, based on the walls. And Luikoff wrote a letter to them saying that, the way you're looking at these objects, as very functional objects, I think I have a different point of view about it. And he was talking about, of course, making posters of advertising, basically the radio and bulbs, etc. But also he was the man who went on to actually create the brand identity for Philips. The shield mark that we have, what we call as the shield. Now, this was very interesting because, of course, the Philips management back then was intrigued by his letter, and they called him and they asked him to actually open a design studio within Philips. And from there, it started the whole journey. And that journey kind of like continued, well into, I have to say, I mean, I wasn't there, for that long, but back then, at least from the history that I know of design in Philips, is that we were talking about design thinking, about involving, see, psychologists and engineers and anthropologists in the design process back when people were not even familiar with what design itself was. But we were talking about bringing people together to focus on users' needs. And that is where I think Philips Design really was truly, a little bit ahead of time, I have to say, in its ideas. And of course, we are very happy that design thinking gained so much traction after that. And of course, we continue to use it as a very powerful tool. We call it co-create, because it's essentially design thinking. But we are the proponents of co-create within our organization and with our customers. So we are very free in kind of like teaching people how do you do co-create. But one of the key things what we also realized as we went like in the at least in the recent decade is that design used to be a little bit of an ivory tower. Designers were under the little bit of this impression that we are the ones who are creative in an organization, and we are the ones who will give the vision of what the future is to the organization, and the rest of the organization basically would kind of like execute on that vision. But what we have realized is that the vision of tomorrow should not be coming from one person, although however brilliant that person could be. It has to be an amalgamation of different people's points of views, because, well, as you know, today it is almost impossible task for one person to understand all the nitty gritties of the business, the intricacies of technology, and to imagine all the like literally millions and millions of possibilities that future could unfold for us. And add to that, our customers have become far more enlightened than they were. So we used to have this very transactional kind of a relationship where all our concern was that, okay, let's make this product, ship this product, and then forget about it. If the customer is not complaining about it, then, well, we don't have to worry about it. We go back to that customer only when we want to sell them the new product. But today our customers are also enlightened. They want to participate in a very informed kind of a dialogue with us, because they have their own take on what the future is, right? So today we are living in an ecosystem where not just our customers, but we see around us, like small startups that are coming up, that are much more agile, that are much more focused on a very small area, a domain within healthcare. And healthcare is such an area, it's like an infinite you can say it's a labyrinth of knowledge. We will never have enough capability to solve all the problems in healthcare, because it's a human body, right? So there are people out there who are working on it, who are brilliant in doing what they are doing. And I think we in Philips, we really understand, and we are humble enough to get this, that yes, indeed there is an ecosystem out there, that there and they're all equal to us. So we want to participate in this in this system. We want to collaborate with people, we want to fund them, and that's where we also have things like accelerator labs, etc., as part of Philips, where we are constantly looking at what is happening out there in the market, what is complementary to us, and can we actually collaborate with them to build the future together. And that's a very different way of looking at the world than companies used to do, back in the 80s, 90s, even in 2000s. Is that, well, we look at customers as basically a means to make money. Like if I'm selling more and more products, then I'm successful. But today our definition of success has also changed a bit, in terms of what impact are we making, on people's lives. So I think we are constantly evolving, and I'm happy that this is happening, that we have come such a long way.
Hey, did you know Philips debuted the groundbreaking mobile intensive care units, ICUs, in India? Every prefabricated ICU unit has a capacity of 9 beds and can be installed in a one day at the chosen location to accommodate the critical care needs of a patient. Wow. And when you shared all of this happening and interesting things in the health tech domain that Philips is operating in, the year 2020 welcomed us to a new normal, which we are admittedly still learning to adapt to. What I wish to know from you is how, in your opinion, does this, along with present social situation, influence how consumers make buying decisions?
Yeah, so, I mean, very interesting question, Rohit, and I don't know whether I'm really qualified to answer it in its full, like depth, but I'm going to attempt it anyway. So, what I would say is that, see, one thing is, of course, due to pandemic, we see this kind of like a topical, you can say, burst in buying behavior or the change in the buying behavior. Like for instance, like people not just in India but world over are buying more, like things like hair trimmers and hair dryers, etc. Because obviously they don't want to go out, and they're concerned about their hygiene and safety, etc. Second thing, I mean, maybe that's like a very small and personal health kind of a thing. But then if you look at healthcare, what is happening, there is a larger trend that is unfolding there, which will have a long-term impact in terms of how do we access healthcare, and that is about remote care. Now, we have been talking about delivering care remotely for a long time, and that has been a little bit of a technology push from many healthcare providers like us. But what has happened due to pandemic is that suddenly the our stakeholders, so the doctors, the hospitals, and also the patients have also realized that perhaps this is also one way of accessing healthcare, of accessing, to talk to my doctor, for instance, to get consultation while sitting at home. And this will have, and I wouldn't say, like, if today we are seeing a large spurt in remote care, that obviously is going to reduce once the pandemic goes down, because at the same time what we see is that the patients themselves still would love to go back and have that face to face contact with the doctors. The doctors also still feel that, seeing a patient in person makes a big difference to them, also in terms of the time it takes to examine one patient, and in a very practical way, to instruct somebody to deal with all the technological challenges, etc., etc. That itself becomes like almost like a friction in terms of the delivery of the care for the doctors. But at the same time, the remote care, the whole thing with remote monitoring, delivering remote care, etc., is also getting to a level of maturity where I don't think we will go back to the days where we were fully depending on the physical contact. So there are a lot of things that will become part of our routine that maybe we will not think twice about. And that's not just about, I think, healthcare or personal health or things like that. I mean, I'm while I'm talking to you, I'm just thinking about, like, if you take an example of a restaurant, like I like me and my family, we love to go to this one Chinese restaurant, and we were last year, because of pandemic, we were dying to go there, and it somehow, getting that home delivery and eating that food at home was not the same as going there, because of the the experience that you have. But then, of course, and then we as soon as the pandemic was a little bit down, we ventured out, and we went there to eat. But what is interesting now is that I think the restaurant is also trying to think about what is essential to the experience of our guests. And one of the things I would just say is that, like, for instance, like their menu card, now they put just a QR code there on the table, and you can see the menu online instead of trying to handle a physical menu, which maybe could have issues of hygiene, etc. That their guests could be, worried about. So, what I'm saying is, what probably the restaurant is thinking is that, what is essential to our experience, why do guests come here, and just get think about those fundamental, the core of that experience, and can we enhance that experience, and try to maybe alleviate maybe their fears, or maybe their pains or friction in the other aspects which were not part of the core experience, but which were there because maybe we didn't pay attention to those. And that is what probably would be that permanent change that would happen, is that pandemic has given us a way of evaluating what we used to think as essential, and maybe define a new essential going forward. That's what I think.
Wow, that's well said. In fact, Abhimanyu, the foundation of design thinking is to put the user at the center of all that is achieved in every field of an organization. Developing a customer focused mindset is valuable framework for how organizations do businesses, outline processes, market their products, recruit talent, say compete and build their brands as well. What I wish to know from you is, how do designers ensure that they put themselves in their
Hmm.
customers' shoes to create an effective product?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, Rohit. Of course, as we strongly believe amongst the design community is that uh, people research is the foundation of any innovation, because if we have to create a meaningful change in people's lives, we first and foremost we must understand where are they in their current state, and we can never understand that current state by sitting in our house and imagining what their world is, because, and I have seen it time and again in my time in Philips, is that everything that when we start the project, we make certain assumptions, because of course let's also not forget that organizations like Philips, which have been around for a very long time, we should not also forget that there is a lot of knowledge within the organization. Yeah, we have been interacting with our customers and users for a long time. So it's important for designers first and foremost to take cognizance of that knowledge that is already existing, and try not to look at every project as reinvention, like starting from scratch. But once you're aware of that knowledge, if you treat all of that knowledge as just mere hypothesis or assumption, and then go out with an open mind to say that they're okay, this is what I know about them, but is this still valid? It's almost like you're venturing out, but you have this other mind which is in the back of your head, which is kind of like almost whether you can use it as a checklist or things to watch out for, etc., to see how our users are evolving. What is it that they are doing, what are the workarounds that they are doing in order to actually achieve the outcome that they are looking for. And our users are much smarter always than what we sometimes actually consider them to be. So they have figured out a lot of things. So it's important for us to know what, whether you call it jugad or whatever, that this is what they're doing. Obviously, of course, not all of these solutions are optimum solutions. So again, it's also wrong perhaps to start listening to, and that happens also in healthcare, where I have done the research, is that you have like this very powerful, we call them as key opinion leader personalities, who would tell you exactly what is required by them. It's also wrong to listen to users and customers just verbatim and then try to implement what they need, because then again you're also taking a very biased view of maybe a very small sample size, and then trying to scale it to a large population. So we should not also do that. But at the same time, if we ask ourselves a question, that if this is the solution that this person was looking for, what is the problem that this person is trying to solve? And I think that problem is more important than the solution, many times. So I would say the research, the best outcome for research is that you come up with problems, because your definition of the problem will actually, it's like not just a half the battle won. I think it's most of the battle won, because like if I look at myself, I'm in an innovation campus where there are 4,000 engineers. They're all brilliant minds who went to the top engineering colleges. So I don't think there is any problem in technology that we cannot solve today. If we cannot solve it, we will definitely know who else can solve it, and we can collaborate with them, we buy them or whatever. What we actually struggle with is like, what is the problem that we are trying to solve? And that's where many times many of us actually struggle to come to even common understanding. And there comes that's like another point that I wanted to make, is that we think about research as only the discovery about our users, but don't forget the organization that is behind you, that is trying to solve this problem. And it's important that we bring along that organization to look at the users along with you, so that they understand it with the same empathy that you are looking at. Because it's not just important for you to just have this a little bit of a condescending attitude towards others, that hey, look, I have the radical empathy but you don't. I understand these people, what they're trying to say, but you are an engineer or you are a business guy, you don't understand them. It's actually not right. We must facilitate, we must train them to also practice that empathy, because once you practice that empathy, your job is half solved. They will start talking like you, and they would be wanting to solve the problems of our users, and that's exactly what we want, right? I mean, as a design outcome.
Hey, did you know Philips ranks number one in healthcare equipment and services sector on Forbes World's Best Employers 2020 list? And while we spoke about getting into customer shoes, Abhimanyu, design strategy is an important element there. In fact, it is all about experience, emotional insight, and narratives built on a foundation of empathy. It's like designing for behavior over time instead of just a single moment in a static artifact. The question that I have for you, Abhimanyu, is how can we translate the deep understanding of users into effective emotional designs, resulting in a better customer experience?
Absolutely, Rohit. I think you hit it on the head, because if I were to say that if there is one change that I have seen in my long career in design, is that just at the other extreme, I would say back in the 90s, I was the designer. I sat in a corner. People gave me the problem. I solved it, and I almost like Moses down the mountain. I told them, look, I have a solution for you. You know, Whereas if you compare that to today, what we are saying is, and is that everything that we know, everything that I produce is basically a hypothesis. It's an assumption. It's an attempt to solve a problem. It's not a solution to the problem, right? So I I strongly believe, and sometimes when we talk about prototypes or we talk about experiments, people tend to think that, oh wow, so we have to spend some time in doing this. But look, if you're visiting a customer, if you have an idea for a solution, telling that customer that idea itself is an experiment. So experiments come in multiple flavors and forms, and sometimes some of them take minutes to actually design, some of them take maybe days to design. But the lower resolution they are, the better they are, because you are not committed to them. If you're making a sketch on a paper, you're far less committed to it than you're making a rendering in computer. So it helps all of our egos also to test as early as possible and as often as possible, because of course sometimes we hate it when people say that this doesn't work. But wouldn't you rather face that now, rather after 6 months, when you have put in like your days and nights, and then come up with something that fails in the market, right? So I think it has been a fantastic process innovation where we have learned to really go out and validate our ideas with our users and customers as early as possible, and that's what we also try to do these days. So absolutely, I agree with that.
Wow, that was splendid. In fact, Abhimanyu, connecting user experience to another strong area of yours, product design. And when we talk about product design, one of the things that comes to my mind is that they're based on hypotheses and ideas that may end up not working at all. In fact, if assumptions are not tested, designers don't learn what works and what doesn't. Designers have started experimenting with their solutions to improve their designs and find out solution that works best. Do you think experimental design can help to make better decisions regarding design improvement?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a great question again. uh, I would say, I mean, we talk about the journey maps and experience flows as part of the design artifacts. Yeah. And sometimes I think designers tend to think about journey maps as something that you do much later, once you have all the information, once you've done all your research, and then to create this beautiful artifact that goes on the wall. But I would say journey maps is something that one can do just as one is doing the research. It's almost like if you're talking to a user in the morning, in the afternoon you can create a journey map. And why is that important? Is because it's almost like, if you're talking about a persona of our user, that's like a snapshot in time. But life is not a snapshot, right? Life is not a moment. Life is always in motion, and it's very important for us to understand that there are things that happen before our solution, and that there are things that will happen after that. So for instance, if I'm trying to design, let's say, a new interface for a cash register, I have to understand where the order is coming from. How does the order come? What happens at the cash register? Then what happens? What happens at the end of the day? What happens over 6 months? What happens to how do I get it serviced? What happens to where do I get it upgraded and things like that. This is all about the journey that our users go through, right? So we have to have a I mean, as much as possible, I think information that we must gather in order to, complete our understanding of this journey. And another thing, what is important is that many times what we see is that when we imagine our solution sitting in a lab or in our rooms, we always think about this kind of like key moments during the journey. And of course, those key moments are very, very important. But what we have to also remember is that in real life, many times things go wrong between these key moments, right? So we have to be aware of what happens between those key moments. So in order to understand that, again, we have to develop that understanding of the journeys, and because it also gives us understanding of and you talked about the emotional satisfaction or reward, and that is so much key, because the users are not just looking for the outcome at the end of the process, but users are also looking at us to give them these emotional cues along the way. So, for instance, if I have put in certain input into an interface, give me a confirmation. That's an emotional thing, or if I'm trying to, let's say, make a purchase, or I'll just give you an example. Like if you have ever paid income tax online, if you put in all your information, and if you have to pay this tax, it suddenly takes you then to your bank, which has this one very bare screen which just says, okay, this is the amount, this is your account number, now pay. And in the beginning it used to freak me out, because I used to think like, oh my god, did I make any mistake in terms of like putting in my number or something like that, because I can't go back now, there's no confirmation here that it's actually meant for me, or and these are all one I mean, the engineer who designed it could be, maybe laughing at me saying that, yeah, but why should you be worried, because it's all been taken care of earlier. But look, people are very emotional beings. So yeah, I could be doing 10 different things at the same time. So I'm constantly looking for that validation as I go, not at just at the end of the process that I have paid and done something, but also along the way that, look, I'm going all right, this is correct. And so if we have to really emotionally engage our customers and users, we have to be very much aware of what is their state along the journey, and also make sure that we are addressing it at the right points in time, so that they keep going, and they are able to complete their tasks with satisfaction or even delight, I would say.
Wow, that was an amazing validation, Abhimanyu. Thank you so much for doing this with us. It was a pleasure hosting you on our first anniversary on Avantika Designeering podcast series. Thank you so much for joining us on our show today.
Hey there, we hope you enjoyed our show. Do write to us on ads@avantika.edu.in. We look forward to your opinions, feedbacks, and suggestions of speakers you would like us to host on this show. Do tune in our channel next week on Wednesday for a new story on Hubhopper or wherever you get your podcast from. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.